The land was dying, and everyone knew it. For 3 years, not a drop of rain had fallen on Israel. The sky was a sheet of hammered bronze, hard, pale, merciless. The Jordan River had shrunk to a trickle between cracked mud banks. Olive trees stood leafless. Livestock grew thin. Women carried empty water jars home from dried-up wells, and children stopped asking why. The famine had moved past the stage of crisis into something worse. The dull, grinding acceptance that this was simply how things were now. And at the center of it all stood a king named Ahab, weak-willed, ambitious, and deeply foolish in the way that only powerful men can be. He had married a Phoenician princess named Jezebel, and she had brought her gods with her. Baal, the storm god, the one who was supposed to send rain. Jezebel had installed 450 of his prophets in the royal court, fed them from the palace table, and systematically hunted down the prophets of the Lord, driving them into hiding in caves and cisterns. Israel had forgotten who it was. The altars of God were broken and overgrown. The old covenant, the old faithfulness, it felt distant as a rumor. Into this broken world walked a man named Elijah, rough-cloaked, fierce-eyed, a prophet from the highlands of Gilead. And he had carried a word from God that was about to crack the silence open like thunder. The question was simple, and it was everything. Whose God was real? Elijah had been in hiding at God's command, sustained miraculously, fed by ravens, sheltered beside a brook that eventually went dry like everything else. But now God told him to come out, to show himself to Ahab, to end this. When Ahab finally saw him, his first words were an accusation. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" 3 years of famine, thousands suffering, and the king blamed the prophet. Elijah didn't flinch. He stood in the dirt road before the most powerful man in the kingdom and said calmly, "I have not troubled Israel. You have, you and your father's house, because you abandoned the commands of the Lord and followed the Baals." Then he issued a challenge. "Gather all Israel at Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Let everyone come and see." Carmel was a long ridge rising above the Mediterranean coast, green once, now seared. The crowds came. All of Israel, it seemed, pressing up the rocky slopes in the dry heat. Merchants, farmers, soldiers, elders. The 450 prophets of Baal arrived in their robes, carrying incense and ritual instruments. The whole weight of the royal religion was assembled, and Elijah stood alone. He looked out at the crowd and spoke plainly, the way a doctor speaks to someone who doesn't want to hear the truth. "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him." The people said nothing. Silence, in all directions. Not hostile, just empty. The silence of people who had lost the habit of conviction. So Elijah proposed a test. 2 bulls, 2 altars. Each side would prepare their sacrifice and lay it on wood, but light no fire. Then they would each call on their God. The one who answered with fire, he is God. The prophets of Baal went first. They built their altar, laid their bull on the wood, and began to call. From morning until noon they cried out, "O Baal, answer us." They danced around the altar in the ancient ritual patterns, chanting, clapping, working themselves into a frenzy. Nothing happened. The wood stayed dry. The sacrifice sat untouched. The sky, cloudless, silent. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he called out. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and needs to be awakened." It was sharp and cutting, and the crowd heard every word. The prophets responded by escalating. They cut themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until the blood ran. They raved all afternoon, their robes soaked, their voices hoarse, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. The sun tracked slowly across the sky, and Baal was silent. He didn't answer, because there was no one there to answer. Evening came. The prophets of Baal collapsed, spent and shamed. Elijah stepped forward. He walked to where the old altar of the Lord had once stood, broken, scattered, neglected. He picked up 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel, and rebuilt the altar with his own hands. Slowly, deliberately. Then he dug a trench around it, wide enough to hold nearly 3 gallons of water. He arranged the wood. He cut the bull and laid it on the altar. And then he gave an instruction that must have made everyone watching glance at each other in disbelief. Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it over the offering. And the wood. They did. He said, do it again. They did. He said, do it a 3rd time. Water poured down over the sacrifice, saturating the wood, filling the trench until it sloshed and ran. In a land that had not seen rain in 3 years, he was pouring out water. Then Elijah prayed. No frantic chanting. No ritual cutting. He stood quietly before the soaked altar, raised his eyes toward heaven, and spoke in a voice the whole crowd could hear. Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. The silence that followed lasted only a moment. Then fire fell. Not a small flame. Not a lick of spark catching dry wood. The fire of the Lord came down and consumed everything. The sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil beneath. It even licked up every drop of water in the trench. The crowd felt the heat of it on their faces, saw the blinding light, smelled something beyond the ordinary chemistry of burning. It was total. It was immediate. It was impossible by any natural explanation. The people fell on their faces, every single one of them, and from the ground, pressed into the dust of Mount Carmel, they cried out with one voice, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." After 3 years of hollow silence, Israel remembered its name. And then the rain came. Elijah sent his servant to look toward the sea 7 times, and on the 7th time, the servant returned with news, a cloud, small as a man's hand, rising from the water. Within hours, the sky went dark. The wind came first, that wild, electric smell of a storm arriving after an impossible absence. Then the rain, torrential, soaking, merciful rain, falling on the cracked ground of Israel for the first time in 3 years. There is something in this story that asks us to sit still for a moment before we walk away from it. This is not simply a miracle story. It is a story about a nation that had forgotten, not through malice, but through drift, through distraction, through the slow erosion of 1,000 small compromises, what it actually believed. And in the middle of that forgetting, one man stood at the edge of a broken altar in a dry land and staked everything on the faithfulness of God. Elijah didn't pour water on that altar because he was certain. He did it because he trusted someone who was. That is the texture of real faith, not the absence of fear, but action taken anyway. The altar rebuilt stone by stone. The water poured out. The prayer spoken in a clear voice before a watching, skeptical crowd. And God answered, not with argument, not with philosophy, with fire. What this story holds is a quiet invitation to every person who has ever stood before something broken, a faith gone dry, a life gone silent, and wondered whether anyone is listening. The God who answered on Carmel is not a God of long ago only. He is the God who hears the prayer spoken in the dust. The fire fell because someone believed it could.